Okay, thanks. Well, this is also my first time, so hopefully people don't walk out. So my story is, 20 years ago, I was hired to be the head of telemarketing for a company called the Franklin Mint. For all of you who are young, Franklin Mint used to sell like cow and winter plates to your parents that would hang on the walls and that kind of stuff. And I was in charge of things like collections, customer service, inside and outside sales for like 20-some countries. Anyway, what happened with the Franklin Mint is that they put together an inventory system that they spent $10 million back then to put together to cut costs. And they didn't do it. It actually raised costs because it messed things up. So if you ordered one cow and winter plate, you would get 30. So all these people would call customer service, and they end up like tripling the size of the customer service staff from like something like 60 people to 180. And that's when I got brought on board. So there was a lot of consternation by the owners of the Franklin Mint because the costs were so high. So there's a lot of conversation on how to cut costs. Anyway, I had an admin who was a graduate of Westchester University, 23 years old, and the head of HR came up to me and said, "You need to fire her. And in fact, what you need to do is replace her with someone who I didn't think worked for me. It was an original member of the Franklin Mint named Matilda, who was a roughly 60-year-old black lady who was illiterate. But what she did is she would take emails, this is how far back it was, that would get printed out and put it on people's desks. So I'm like, I can't do that. I mean, the person I need needs to do Word and needs to do these kind of things, and she's illiterate. And the guy goes, that doesn't matter. You hire her, and when she can't do the job, you fire her. That's the way these guys thought. So I'm like, nah, that's not going to happen. So we fought back and forth about this for months. So we had this meeting, which basically was my boss, my boss's boss, the head of HR, a director of HR, my director of customer service, who was roughly, at the time, a 40-ish-year-old woman who was married to somebody from the Naval Academy, just really hard-nosed, and the head of sales for the Franklin Mint. We get in this meeting, and our combined salaries for this 3-hour meeting was more than what this woman made in a year. So at the end of the meeting, my boss's boss says, Bernie, I don't care what you have to do, you fire Matilda now. This is around 4:30 in the afternoon. So Carol and I walk across. If you've ever seen the Franklin Mint, it was this huge building. We're on one side of it, and our customer service staff was on the other side. So we walk across, go to fire Matilda, she's gone. She left us for the day. So I'm like, okay, Carol, here's what we got to do. Tomorrow morning, we'll get in at 7 o'clock in the morning before anybody shows up. We'll find Matilda, we'll let her go, and hopefully, we could do it right. So, of course, I'm late. And get there about 10 after 7, walk into Carol's office, no Matilda. I'm like, Carol, where's Matilda? Did you fire her without any witnesses? She goes, oh, no, Bernie, that problem's taken care of. I'm like, what are you talking about? Bernie, she died last night. I'm like, oh my God, what? He goes, Bernie, she died last night. I'm totally stunned. So I walk into my office, sit down. Honest to God, my boss calls me up and says, hey, what happened with Matilda? I'm like, Jackie, that problem's been taken care of. And Jackie was like, what? I go, she died. Dead silence. Literally 2 minutes later, the head of HR calls me up and says, is there any way she could have known? I'm like, no. I mean, we were on one side of the building. She left before we got to the other side of the building. So they have a wake 2 days later. And Carol and I were the Franklin Mint representatives at the wake. So we go there, and it's actually a really fun wake, if you could have that. I mean, there's food, people are dancing, that kind of stuff. And these people are hugging me because he says, Matilda really liked you. I didn't even know she worked for me. And there we go, like, she really liked you, she thought you were great. We felt terrible, and we were like hugging people and that kind of stuff. So we walk out, going home, and Carol and I were talking to each other, and we talked each other out of quitting, because of what was going on. Well, what's the silver lining in this story? Well, Matilda was an original member of the Franklin Mint, and it was owned by Joe Siegel, who also founded QVC. Joe Siegel had a thing where anybody who was an original member of the Franklin Mint got $1 million life insurance, and it got grandfathered through all the ownerships of the Franklin Mint. So this was 26 years later. Her life insurance policy was worth $2.2 million. Had we fired her that day, she would not have gotten the life insurance policy. Because we didn't fire her, She was entitled to the life insurance policy. Her family got $2.2 million. She had 7 grandchildren. All 7 grandchildren went to college with that thing. 3 of them went to Ivy League schools. So that's the silver lining. That's my story.
Bernie, everybody.